Good morning. It's Monday, August 18th, 2014. This is your I-24 News Morning Edition. We're still in a special broadcast this morning. It is day 42 of Operation Protective Edge, and today marks the end of the 7th week since the launch of the operation. The current ceasefire is due to end tonight at midnight, with both sides in Cairo doubtful that the Israeli and Palestinian negotiators could achieve any kind of agreement before this deadline, unless Hamas and Israel agree to extend it or reach a long-term deal. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed yesterday that what he called Hamas's defeat in Gaza would not be followed by a diplomatic victory for the Islamists in the negotiations in Cairo. Hamas on Saturday had rejected an 11-point Egyptian ceasefire proposal. And meanwhile, Hamas Deputy Political Chief Musa Abu Marzouk wrote on his Facebook page that Israel rejected the Egyptian paper by introducing amendments to it, returning negotiations to, quote, square one. We're joined this morning in studio by I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Tal Shalev. Good morning, Tal.
Good morning.
And by Haaretz senior defense correspondent Amir Oren. Good morning, Amir.
Morning, Gil.
Let's take a quick look at this following report and we'll chat.
With little more than a day left to a 120-hour temporary ceasefire, it seems Israel and Hamas are still nowhere near reaching a settlement that will officially bring the current conflict to a close. As talks in Cairo continue, reports have noted progress on the issues of goods and people crossing the border in and out of Gaza, but it appears both sides are very far apart on the matter of Palestinian demilitarization, as well as Hamas's demands regarding the construction of air and seaports.
The Israeli delegation to Cairo from the first day is working under very clear instructions to stand steadfast on Israel's security needs. Only if there is a clear solution to our security needs, only then will we be prepared to come to an understanding.
According to Palestinian reports, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has been pressuring Hamas leader Khalid Mashal to accept the Egyptian proposal currently on the table.
Our goal is to stop the fight and to stick to the Egyptian initiative and not any other one.
However, both Israel and Hamas have stated that they are also open to a return to the battlefield if a resolution is not achieved.
As long as calm does not return, Hamas will continue to sustain very harsh strikes. If Hamas thinks that we cannot withstand it for an extended period, it is mistaken.
It remains a very real possibility that the current conflict will end with no official agreement in place, though it is likely Israel will agree to humanitarian aid entering the Strip in any case. In this scenario, quiet will depend on deterrence, but past experience suggests it may not last for long.
So, Tal, of course, as we've been saying almost every day since the negotiations in Cairo started, conflicting reports, still unsure what's going to happen today at midnight.
Well, once again, I think we've been through this scenario, I don't know how many times before, but once again, the clock in Cairo is ticking. That's what we can say. There are 16 hours left till 12 o'clock till the ceasefire expires. And judging by the previous experience, we're going to have a very busy day with a lot of statements and quotes from unnamed Palestinian, Israeli, Egyptian officials talking about some progress, no progress, very close, wide gaps. The truth is, most of these reports and most of these statements do not have much to do with reality and what is going on in the negotiation room, and we will know what's going to happen at 11:59. At the moment, the Egyptian 11-point plan put on the table last week was not satisfactory to each one of the sides, perhaps maybe only the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, who emerged as the only real gainer. As we mentioned, the Hamas did not get any real achievement from this plan, and Israel too, as we heard the Israeli Prime Minister had a lot of reservations about it, even though it did not reject the plan officially. But you could hear behind the words of Netanyahu talking about Israel's security interests that must come first. Israel was not happy, the Israeli cabinet was not happy with the fact that the Egyptian initiative restricts Israel's ability, the IDF's ability to operate inside Gaza against the tunnels or other terror threats. It was also not happy with the fact that an airport or a seaport is going to be discussed in the later stage of the negotiations, according to the Egyptian plan. So there is a last-minute effort from the Egyptians. We heard reports about maybe raising another extension of the ceasefire to bring another month of ceasefire to enable negotiations. But the common assumption, I think, at least on the Israeli side, is that nothing will come out of it, and we'll go back to some kind of informal truce with going back to the formula of quiet will be answered by quiet.
Right.
Israeli officials say if this happens, any rocket fire will be answered forcefully, and basically that is the atmosphere in Jerusalem today.
But until that happens, Amir, this means that tomorrow morning or even at 12:01 this night, we can have rockets into Israel again.
Yes, it's possible. You know that diplomatically, it's a very well-known and even well-worn tactic to say yes, but or no, unless. We had the so-called roadmap some 12 years ago, which then Prime Minister Sharon added 14 reservations to, and to the hardliners in the cabinet, he presented the 14 reservations, but to President Bush,
right,
he emphasized the roadmap itself. So Netanyahu is trying to walk a fine line here, because the negotiations, not only are there many players involved, but also it's substance versus symbolism, not only style, but symbolism. For Israel, substance is all important. Is it going to be quiet? Could Netanyahu go back to the residents of the southern part of Israel and tell them, lo and behold, there will be no rockets, no mortar shells? And for Khaled Mashal and his associates, symbolism is important. Could they go back to the people of Gaza and tell them the siege has been lifted?
Meaning the gaps are way too wide, as you see it right now, for any kind of solution to be put on the table tonight.
The gaps are too wide for a formal agreement to be reached. And the question is, if there is no formal agreement, if there are only understandings, will Hamas be ready and willing to impose its will on the rogue organizations, assuming that Hamas itself will not fire? Will it go out of its way to tell Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is also represented in Cairo, but is of another mind, and the various other groups and organizations, hold your fire? Because if not, Israel will have to say, we are holding Hamas accountable for whatever is being fired from Gaza, and the residents of the South will go back to Netanyahu and tell him, you did not keep your word.
Right. And
Netanyahu has a real problem with the residents of the South. It's, I think it's worrying him very much. In the past few weeks, we've seen him meet them more and more, bring them to meetings more and more. Just before their big demonstration on Thursday, he made it clear he left the cabinet meeting, the security cabinet meeting, to meet them because it's very important to him.
With the mayors of the communities.
The mayors of the communities. He does understand that this is this could create a problem in the future.
But Tal, you know, this is, of course, there is no real comparison, but it does bring to mind the period when Israel believed that by negotiating with some leaders of the Palestinians, it will have the will of the Palestinian community represented. Even if Netanyahu manages to choose the mayors, the residents are not subordinate to the mayors. They will go out of the villages. They will demonstrate again. The mayor of Sderot or the regional council chairman anywhere cannot control the residents. So it's really futile for Netanyahu to meet with some 10 or 15 office holders and believe that that he can keep the residents quiet.
Well, it's better that he meets with them than he doesn't meet with them, then he ignores them.
This comes right before they held a demonstration, of course, earlier last week,
Thursday,
of course.
yes.
They have the demonstration. They have PR. They have a strategic consultants. They know what they're doing. They're not going to use this. It's not going to be just another small protest. This is going to be a big protest, and they're having
Is it political?
It's not. It's political in the sense that there's a. It's a bit like after the second Lebanon war, there's a big trust crisis between them and the leadership, and it's kind of evaporating all across. It's not staying just in the south. In the demonstration on Thursday, there were thousands of residents of Tel Aviv and other countries,
right,
because people understand that they've been promised something. These people have been promised something, and they do not want to go back to the current situation. And that was promised to them, that they will not go back to the current situation.
And the media is waiting for them anyway. And even if they did not have to pay for advertisement for the various protests that they are putting forward, the media is waiting at the door. And whatever the cabinet decides, the very first interview interviewee will be Chaim Yelin from the Negev or another office holder.
From the Negev.
So Netanyahu knows that this is one front he has to handle along with the Hamas front.
But in addition to public opinion, which obviously maybe is the top on his agenda right now, he also has his cabinet ministers that are also going to use also public opinion, but also are being briefed upon what's happening in Cairo, maybe not as much as they would like to be, and they're going to use what's happening in Cairo for their own political gain as well.
Well, that is, we can definitely expect the minute that the Cairo deal will be over, or we'll know what's happening with it. If it's over, continuing, then yes. Naftali Bennett and Avigdor Lieberman are just waiting to jump out of their holes and start a new campaign. Both of them are competing on the same electorate, but many of them are, I think, many of the people they're competing on have been a lost cause for Netanyahu to begin with. Netanyahu's basic political base in the Likud probably supports him, and the support is still okay. When you see the polls, the Likud hasn't lost much support. What is losing support is the support for Netanyahu as a prime minister approval ratings. It's interesting, those two people, it's interesting to see what will happen with what will happen inside the Likud with his contenders inside the Likud, and it's also interesting to see what will happen from the left, because both Tzipi Livni and Yair Lapid, I don't know if they can live in a situation like it, continue to tell their voters that this status quo is sustainable. At the end of the day, Netanyahu maybe did have a chance out of the Egyptian initiative to launch a much more wide-scale cooperation with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, and that at the moment is not happening.
Well, I'm not sure that Lapid is to the left of Netanyahu, or that even Lapid even knows where he is at any given moment. But Netanyahu is vulnerable politically. And someone at the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv has been doing a very superficial job at reporting back to Washington on Netanyahu's political strength. Because if President Obama, in an interview with Tom Friedman, quoted some poll numbers and said that based on that, Netanyahu is very strong, they don't understand Israeli politics. Netanyahu is very weak right now, and the weakness is sensed by people like Bennett and Lieberman, who are angling for his job, and within the Likud, Gideon Sa'ar and others will use every opportunity to push him aside, much like the Conservative Party in Britain pushed aside Margaret Thatcher many years ago.
That's just the least. We should remember that in the upcoming weeks, he's going to have a much bigger challenge, and that's the international community day after the war. We're talking about the Chavis Committee. We're talking about the ICC, which the Palestinians may or may not apply to. We're talking about boycott. The Palestinians are now keen on promoting campaigns.
The BDS movement and so forth.
Not only the BDS, and for the first time, I think, in the upcoming weeks and months, unfortunately, we will see the BDS movement, the seeds that they have planted in the past years that everyone has been warning us from, the boycott and divestment from European countries. We're seeing it. It's going to happen. And this is going to be Netanyahu's a bigger challenge, because he likes to present himself as Mr. Security, Mr. Diplomacy, but in the end, if after all this time of his term, we're back, where Israel will be in maybe the worst situation, I think Amir will be able to know historically since when, but this for the Israeli public, the sense of boycott and the sense of international delegitimacy is a very, very scary notion.
Yeah, just one point. It may sound strange to you, but Israel is portrayed in some ways in the U.S. Public opinion and consciousness as the officer in Ferguson, Missouri, shooting an unarmed Palestinian, or in that case, black man.
And that is a good analogy, because my question is Netanyahu not agreeing, or can we look at the lack of agreement on Israel's side to any kind of Egyptian proposal now in Cairo as a political decision of Netanyahu, or does he genuinely believe that what's happening now in Cairo is not fitting for Israel? Can he make that differentiation?
I don't think he does make that difference. I think what's going on in Cairo, Netanyahu couldn't have passed it in the cabinet. The current Egyptian initiative would not pass in the cabinet. I also think there is a substance to this. I also think that Israel should not give up its right to defend itself if it needs to infiltrate the Gaza Strip for tunnels. I do not think Israel should sign this. And I do think there is a problem which has come up in the cabinet, and I hope was one of Netanyahu's considerations, with giving Hamas the international legitimacy that it is getting while signing more and more agreements with them.
But you know that these terms that you are referring to and that you suggest should be rejected are very similar to what happened after Pillar of Defense in November of 2012. The problem is that this time around, expectations were set so high, and Netanyahu promised that we are not going back to the earlier situation, that he cannot simply reiterate what he did less than 2 years ago. Now he must get a better result.
But do you believe, as I posed the question to Tal, that Netanyahu is not agreeing to what's happening now in Cairo for a political reason, because he promises these promises to the South?
Not only for political reasons. There is a basic, substantial position to which all Israeli prime ministers and all Israeli politicians at the center, perhaps not the extreme right or the extreme left, would adhere to. And in that case, Netanyahu would enjoy the support of 80 to 90% of the Israeli public. But following that, after the very narrow definition of what does security constitute, following that, most of the Israeli public understands that it is in the interest of Israel to have a thriving, prosperous Gaza Strip with much to lose. If Israel wants the population in Gaza, the 1.8 million Palestinians who may not all like Hamas to rule over them, if Israel would like all of those Palestinians to resist the pressures from the extremists to go into another round with Israel, it must give them hope, must give them a better economy, a better life, which they will not want to lose in the next round.
And which will, of course, is better sooner than later. And that's the question that the international community that you posed, Tal. How long will the international community wait, quote unquote, for Netanyahu to reach a deal? Until it puts its own pressure in?
Well, it's the assumption in Israel and the Israeli Foreign Ministry that not long. The minute that a deal in Cairo will collapse, the international community will come up with some initiative to help, especially because of the humanitarian situation in Gaza, which is something even though Israel is promising to open and give humanitarian aid, it's not clear this will be enough. And it's also subordinated to Israel's security concerns, and that's a very wide range. So we can expect the Israeli Foreign Ministry is expecting maybe a UN Security Council resolution or maybe another EU statement. But the fact is that also Netanyahu's relationship with all of these countries is at a very low to begin with, because of the collapse of peace talks. And if we go back 4 months to the end of the peace talks, Israel's situation in the international community was bad to begin with. Then the operation started. We had the abduction. There was a boost of legitimacy to Israel's actions. But now the operation is over, and the results in Gaza are clear. The destruction and the definitely high death toll. And I don't think Netanyahu has credit.
Right.
He doesn't have the credit to even try to do anything by his own. There is a demand from the international community that Israel do something.
Yeah, next to Netanyahu and better than Netanyahu regarding policy, the only seasoned member of the cabinet is Tzipi Livni, who is now the justice minister but was the foreign minister 8 years ago during Lebanon. And she has tried, when this crisis began many weeks ago, to go for a UN resolution, much like Resolution 1701 following Lebanon.
Right.
Now it is past the time for that. From Israel's point of view, now it is going to be imposed on Israel.
And when you look at the diplomatic relations between the personal leaders, between Obama and Netanyahu, of course, I'm talking about the Wall Street Journal report that kind of had a domino effect here in Israel. Is this a new all-time low in personal relationships between Obama and Netanyahu?
Well, I think we have to wait till today and see how D.C. will react to D.C. didn't really have a time to react to the Wall Street Journal, and it was
a week. weekend.
It was a weekend. It didn't catch. The Americans have other issues, much more burning issues that they're dealing with at the morning. It didn't really catch the news cycle. But we have to wait and see if that catches some of the congressmen who might start making a political
but they are on
noise
recess.
out of it.
The Congress is on recess, so maybe, of course,
August, right?
but you're talking about all-time lows. Records are being broken all the time. We thought we saw the relationship hit ground bottom. Now we find that there are tunnels behind the ground, so who knows?
And this is crucial for Netanyahu at this point, exactly because of the international community and what is it doing. The U.S. is crucial in many junctures ahead of if it's in the UN Security Council to try and veto resolutions or at least influence them. This is also regarding any Palestinian move in the international community. In the past, I think we could count on the Obama administration to block everything. I'm not sure at this point of frustration between the Obama administration and Netanyahu government. It's interesting to see how it will react.
Also, because Obama chose not to take military moves throughout the region and based his rationale on humanitarian grounds, he's working in Iraq to save the Yazidis on the mountaintop. The humanitarian problems in Gaza will have an effect on Obama's policy. He will have to reason that whatever he's doing is going to help the poor Palestinians, even though Israel may not like the result in the document.
How did Netanyahu's political inner circle react to the Wall Street Journal report, and can they explain it? Is it something that's even affecting them, or are they looking at what's happening now in Cairo as a very regional conflict, and they don't maybe need the Americans as much as they thought they did?
Well, I think Netanyahu's inner circle is divided. It's actually interesting. Netanyahu has a lot of ex-American citizens on his team. Those people, I think, are more Republican and more anti-Obama than the Israelis on the team, like the National Security Advisor Yossi Cohen or other. They're divided. If you speak to Netanyahu's political circle, also divided. Some of the people from the right of Netanyahu were encouraged from this report. They said, oh, look, Netanyahu's doing good. The U.S., Obama doesn't understand anything in the Middle East. And but the problem is, and I've been saying this a few times in the past few weeks since we've had all of these reports of the divisions and the tension, there's no good messenger. There's not a good messenger between Jerusalem and Washington.
Not an accepted messenger.
Well, I don't know if he's accepted. He's not good, okay?
Right.
I was talking about yesterday, and I wonder what Amir will think about it, but at least in the previous Netanyahu government, we had Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak was a defense minister. We can say a lot of bad things about him, but one of the good things about him was that he was a very accepted and fawned upon the American administration. Right. When there were problems, Barak would go to the United States, and the problems and the daylight would go away from the rooms, and the relationship would be back to normal. At this moment, we do not have anyone like that. Not the defense minister, not the foreign minister, not the Israeli ambassador to Washington. And in my idea, that's one of the reasons that we're seeing all of these reports. In the end, I think the relationship is good, but there is a constant undermining and a constant undermining of the relationship.
But you mentioned the term advisors. On the United States, Netanyahu has no advisors. He is advising himself. He is certain that he is the highest authority on U.S. political affairs. He had Ron Dremer, who is now the ambassador.
Right, and he had Michael Oren. He put specifically people that are...
Michael Oren was a spokesperson for his policy. Michael Oren told the New York Times that he is not in the loop when he was the ambassador, thereby making certain that he will not be in the loop in Washington, where they are watching where power rests. But Netanyahu is so certain of his knowledge of U.S. politics, which in a way is true if you go back to the 1980s, but perhaps not in the more recent past, that he has made mistake after mistake in looking at the U.S. scene and acting on it, as we saw with Mitt Romney versus Barack Obama. And the mistakes keep piling one upon another, but you cannot blame the advisors. It's Netanyahu personally.
And Amir, another report coming out yesterday in the Israeli media was of the ton of these openings in the south that the residents of the south now found. Obviously, if we go back to what we started from the beginning, the fear of the southern residents to return to these communities, and now they're returning, they're seeing holes in the ground, which can mean many different things. Obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is more tunnels.
No, it's not more tunnels, although everything must be checked. It's some ground effect, but it only goes to show you how fragile nerves are, especially in the south. And it is more indicative of the holes in Netanyahu's policy than in the ground itself.
And with regard to the military establishment, if tonight does see rocket fire, how ready is the IDF now to, of course it's going to be fire for fire, but will we also seeing any kind of extension of the operation?
There is a reluctance on the military's part to go back into a ground action. Of course, they will salute and execute. It is hard to see how Israel will not respond by air to whatever is fired upon. And the real fear is that there will be nothing tonight or early tomorrow morning, but a day from tomorrow, and then 2 days of quiet, and then overnight, all of a sudden, a mortar shell here, a rocket there, and it will not really be a war of attrition. It will be a war of nuisance. But nevertheless, Israelis will have to contend with a new reality where they are pressed to choose between just sitting tight or going back into an action which they don't really want to.
Have there been changes now on the ground in terms of security, also in the south and also within the IDF because of this threat?
There are no real changes. There are some
regulations, new directives?
Some reinforcement. The barrier, defense with whatever is coming along with it, the troops and the various mechanisms, defense is being refurbished, but and there are no tunnels. We will have to see whether in Cairo the so-called security zone, the 300-meter, 400-meter strip of land west of the border is going to be kept, because if Israel is forced to go back to 100 meters or perhaps even to defense itself, it will have to change its tactics. But this is not major. This is more in order to get the residents to go back to their villages and feel secure.
And Tal, on the political side, we've always spoken about Netanyahu with the defense minister and with the IDF chief of staff. That relationship stands strong and will stand strong within the next few days, because that's what he has left, really.
Well, with the defense minister, yes. With the chief of staff, we're already hearing a bit of disagreements. At least, the political system, the political level likes to blame the military level for not presenting creative enough solutions. But then the military level has also a point that they had very nice achievements on the ground, and because there was no political or long-term strategy accompanied with it, then basically nobody remembers that. It's very interesting. The military achievements were quite substantial, but when you go and ask the average Israeli, did Israel win this war, he'll probably say no, exactly because there is a sense in the military, there is a sense of missing it, missing the point, because it wasn't accompanied with...
When Chief of Staff Gantz had a gaffe by promising prematurely that quiet is back, the pro-Netanyahu media was very happy to direct fire at him rather than at the politicians.
Okay, thank you both for joining me this morning. We'll be back very soon after these headlines from the I-24 News Desk. We'll be talking about the latest from Iraq, but first, some more of this morning's headlines. Good morning, and thank you for staying with us. We're staying now in the region, and we're going to move on to Iraq. But with me first in studio is Channel 10's defense correspondent, Or Heller. Or, we do have some updates from this morning regarding the kidnapping that started. And one will say the entire Operation Protective Edge. Some will say it has nothing to do with it. What's the latest?
Well, after midnight, hundreds of IDF soldiers got into Hebron, and they demolished the houses of the three kidnappers and murderers of the three young people. This demolishing of the house were after three appealing to the Supreme Court, were denied by the families, and then the decision is to demolish every house of every terrorist that kidnap settlers or soldiers in the West Bank in order to deter them for doing
and this has been Israeli policy for quite a while now, even though the international community has condemned it many times, saying it doesn't really deter these people to go out and commit these crimes again.
Well, there is an inside, let's say, debate inside the defense establishment between those who think that this is a deterrent movement and those who think it's not. There was a committee, an internal IDF committee that said in the last few years that this is not a deterrent move against terrorists to demolish their houses and homes. But again, today in the Shin Bet and the IDF, the common wisdom is that it's maybe the only way to deter terrorists from kidnapping and murdering settlers and soldiers in the West Bank. So we'll have to wait and see.
And as I said in the opening, it does, many people do connect between the two events, between that event, of course, in June and the operation that we're in today.
We don't know yet if there's a direct connection between the kidnapping and the Operation Protective Edge. We do know that Israel has arrested a man named Hussam Kawasme, who got his money to fund this kidnapping from Gaza, from Hamas Gaza. So this is the direct link between Hamas Gaza and the kidnapping and killing of the 3 young people. But we do not know that for sure, because the kidnappers, the murderers, are on the run, and they haven't been arrested yet.
Do you foresee that this demolition of the houses will spark any more outrage in the West Bank, which has been relatively quiet? Yes, we have seen protests here and there, but still relatively quiet for the IDF.
Well, I think that the Shin Bet and the Israeli military intelligence think that for the moment there is not enough spark, there's not enough fuel, if you like, in the West Bank for a third intifada, which this is the basic question when the Prime Minister asked the army, asked the intelligence, are we facing a third intifada? So the answer is not yet. But again, every operation in Gaza, another killing of Palestinians in the West Bank, of course, raised the flame.
We're going to go now to Iraq, where the U.S. has widened its air campaign against the Sunni extremists in Iraq, sending bombers for the first time in support of a Kurdish ground offensive to retake the Mosul Dam, and promising now to keep up the strikes until the strategic post is out of the hands of the Islamic State fighters. Kurdish forces who launched the ground operation yesterday managed to push back the militants from some positions around the dam by the end of the day, and the operation was the most highly coordinated among the U.S., Kurdish, and Iraqi forces since American troops left Iraq in late of 2011. Let's take a quick look at this report, and then we'll chat.
A new turn of events is taking place in Iraq today, as U.S. and Kurdish forces are reportedly advancing on the Mosul Dam. The joint operation to reclaim the dam from Islamic State militants entails U.S. airstrikes and a ground military action carried out by the Peshmerga, the armed Kurdish fighters.
We must resist. We must reclaim Bashika by any means, hopefully with the help of God and the strength of the Peshmerga. On this front line, we will retake Bashika with minimal losses.
The dam in the city of Mosul is a strategic stronghold as it supplies water and electricity to northern Iraq. Islamic State combatants had taken control of the dam earlier in August. But sources in the Iraqi government are warning that collaborations of this kind with the U.S. will result in the destruction of Iraq. On Saturday, German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier visited a temporary shelter for Christian refugees at Mar Yusuf Church in the city of Erbil and addressed the volatile humanitarian situation in Iraq.
Spent already €4.5 million for humanitarian aid, and the German cabinet has decided on Wednesday this week that we are spending another €20 million for humanitarian aid.
Deposed Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki leaves behind a legacy of profound sectarianism, which the US-backed al-Abadi, Iraq's new leader, is expected to reverse. Iraq's most influential cleric, Grand Ayatollah al-Sistani, spoke in support of the new Prime Minister.
Without a doubt, the completion of the process to fill the 3 presidential posts and the regional and international welcome is a rare and positive opportunity to solve all Iraq's problems, especially the political and security ones.
But as the U.S. deepens its involvement in the country's state of affairs, the Iraqi people, still besieged by the Islamic State's continuous attacks, seem doubtful about the prospect of a new hope.
And we're also joined by Idan Barir, a PhD candidate at the Department of Middle Eastern and African Studies at Tel Aviv University and an expert on the Yazidi cultural movement. Idan, we spoke last week about who the Yazidis actually are. This really brought the world to the attention of these people. The question now is, of course, that the United States did intervene because we saw those pictures of the Yazidis on the hilltop. Now it seems that the United States is here to stay for a little bit, at least a limited time.
As far as I can tell, the United States are deploying forces in order to help the Kurds maintain their line, their border with the Iraqi state, and sort of retain their autonomy. The Yazidis may have been a nice,
symptom of the conflict.
No, it was sort of a pretext to enter, to get back into Iraq, and it was a good pretext for the American, the American public. But as far as we can see now, the Americans are not really helping in Sinjar and in the Sinjar tragedy. Most of their military aid is given to the Kurds in the north. We just heard about the retaking of the Mosul Dam.
Right.
Most of the work done in the Sinjar area was done by Kurdish fighters from Rojava, from the Syrian, the Kurdish autonomy in northern Syria, and by militants from the PKK.
Would the United States have opted not to go into this conflict? We can also see, we can make an analogy to what's happening in Gaza. Very hesitant to go in with boots on the ground, of course, let alone any limited airstrikes. We had not seen the Yazidis on Sinjar?
It's hard to say. It's a sort of theoretical question, but I think the leverage, the military leverage that the American brought in by their decision to somehow intervene in the arena might have helped, morally at least, for the Kurds in their operation in Sinjar. That for sure. And the hesitancy, the American hesitancy is sort of understandable. You can understand their hesitancy, based on their past in the region. But as far as the Yazidis can tell, it was too little and too late for the Americans to help them.
What state are they in now? Now that the world is, looking at these people, people that, about 2 weeks ago, nobody knew who they were, where they came from, who are they belonging to, if quote unquote. What's their situation now, and who are they looking to for kind of as a patron? So
we're looking at 2 arenas, to be very honest. The first one is Sinjar. That was the most dramatic and tragic one that we've seen since Sunday, 2 weeks ago. This tragedy is about to end, one way or another. It has been ending very tragically for some people. Many people fled the area or were taken out of this area by the Kurdish fighters and are now at least militarily safe in the Kurdish autonomy in the north. Which is a sterile zone for now. We have to say that it's for now, right? For the time being. But this is the future tragedy, as I can see. There are around roughly 250,000 to 300,000 people, Yazidi people, refugees in the Kurdish area in the north. And we're speaking about roughly 500,000, a little bit more than 500,000 Christians. So it sums up to 1 million refugees in this area, which is home for roughly 4.5 to 5 million Kurds. It will cause a big problem in the future, and I think that's where Western forces and maybe even Israel can step in order to aid, maybe in absorbing for just on a temporary basis some Yazidi or Christian refugees, or on a long-haul solutions to find a long-haul solution for the Iraqi minority refugees problem.
You mentioned Israel, and before we look at how it looks from the Israeli side, from Jerusalem, the question is, of course, Israel has voiced time and again throughout the past few decades even its support for the Kurdish minority. it's not very clear where Israel stands on that diplomatically today, but it is clear that they do support the Kurdish minority. Is that something that can help the situation?
Rhetorically, Israel does support the Kurdish minority in Iraq with the Kurdish autonomy. But that doesn't have anything to do with the Yazidi problem or the minorities problem, because as far as I can say now,
because it's only rhetorics.
It's beyond rhetorics. The minorities in Iraq do not see today a solution, a long-haul solution in Iraqi Kurdistan. Iraqi Kurdistan will not be able to absorb this huge number of minority refugees fleeing from the areas or the I forgot the name. The contested areas in the southern part of Kurdistan, the parts between Iraq and Kurdistan. So they will not be able to absorb it and offer a long-haul solution. So one way or another, Israel's support of the Kurdish autonomy will not help in solving the minorities problem in this region.
And Or, of course, from Jerusalem, the picture is pretty bleak, but we have to say that it's not the first on the agenda of the item of the defense establishment here in Israel.
Yeah, we have enough troubles of our own, unfortunately. But, for several decades, Mossad workers and IDF officers were in Kurdistan in the 60s, in the 70s, before, of course, this was stopped. And you've heard the declaration by the Prime Minister Netanyahu that support the Kurdish claim for
But it's only words, correct? There's no intention really to intervene.
I don't know. I don't have any knowledge about today for a military cooperation on the ground between IDF forces and the Kurdish forces, as were before several decades. I think that Israel has enough problem of her own. But as long for the Daesh problem, so Israel
the Islamic State.
Yeah, the Islamic State. Israel is close monitoring Daesh, of course, because she heard you can hear the rhetoric of Daesh as every good extreme Muslim. They say that our final goal is Jerusalem. So every Muslim, every terrorist who said our final goal is Jerusalem, of course, Israel look out for him and hear what he has to say.
But operationally, has the IDF prepared for any kind of internal?
No. The closest point Daesh got to Israel is 600 kilometers. So we have to take this very proportionally.
But it can crumble in a second. We've seen the.
Yeah, but you've seen Daesh operate in a failed states. You saw them operate in Iraq, in Syria. Maybe they will try to enter Jordan. If they enter Jordan, it will compromise the strategic interests of Israel, and then we'll see an active role of Israel in the Daesh crisis.
Because it's important to note that Israel, with Jordan and with Egypt, both of its neighbors, is working security-wise as normal. The operation in Gaza has not touched upon.
Of course, and the security ties never been better, and the strategic ties never been better, because everyone understands that the new balance of power in the Middle East must.
They do have common interests.
Yeah.
The last border, quickly,
moderate interest
is, of course, the Syrian border with Israel, which has time to time throughout the Syrian civil war, we have seen some kind of action there. Is the Israeli establishment looking at the Syrian border now because of the Islamic State?
The Israeli establishment look in the Syrian border since 2011, since the war there began. But we have to separate between the Jabhat al-Nusra, the organization who wants to be Al-Qaeda in the south of the Golan Heights, and Daesh. There are others.
Many different fractions.
Many different fractions of the same. Crazy ideas, but we have to separate between these. Al-Qaeda is not Daesh, and Daesh is not Al-Qaeda. But what we've seen in Daesh is several thousands of fighters who basically got pickup trucks and Kalashnikovs. So when they will face a big army, an organized army, they will fail. And you saw that there has no response to the American attacks.
Well,
from the air.
From the air, and then some will say that unless Americans don't go with boots on the ground, these limited attacks won't really solve the problem of ISIS.
Yeah, I think that there's no doubt what will be the consequences of the engagement between the American army and Daesh. But America has her own interest in not involved in this madness.
Or Heller, thank you for joining us. Idan Barir, thank you for joining us. We're going to go quickly for more headlines, and we'll be back. Good morning, and thank you for staying with us here at I-24 News Morning Edition. We're now moving on to the ongoing saga in Missouri in the United States. Police in the U.S. state have fired tear gas and smoke canisters into a crowd of about 400 people protesting against the killing last week of an unarmed black teenager by police in the town of Ferguson. This comes after authorities imposed a midnight curfew for the second night in a row in the tense St. Louis suburb. To hear more about it, we're joined in studio by I-24 News correspondent Danny Swibel. Hi, Danny. Thank you for joining us. And by I-24 News correspondent Gabi Tartakovsky. Gabi, thank you for also joining us. We're going to take a look quick at your report, Danny, and we'll take it from there.
Authorities on Sunday had imposed a midnight curfew for the second night in a row in the tense St. Louis suburb, where an unarmed black teen was shot to death last week by police. The state of Missouri hopes to secure an elusive peace as protesters continue to gather. Civil rights activist Al Sharpton called for justice Sunday at a rally for Michael Brown and questioned authorities' decision to release a video allegedly of Brown robbing a store.
In all of my life, I've never seen nothing more despicable than while this mother and this father and their families haven't even had the time to bury their son, the police chief would release a tape trying to disparage his name while his mama's still weeping.
I had a chance to...
Missouri Governor Jay Nixon conceded that the announcement that Brown had been a suspect in the robbery of a convenience store and the subsequent releasing of this video footage should not have happened and had no connection to Brown's shooting.
Our security team and the Highway Patrol did not know that was going to be released. I don't think the Attorney General knew that. And quite frankly, we disagree deeply. I think for two reasons. Number one, to attempt to, in essence, disparage the character of this victim. And secondarily, it did put the community and, quite frankly, the region and the nation, on alert again.
The sounds of protest and smell of tear gas still fills the air of Ferguson. This killing has opened a wound in Ferguson and throughout the United States, not to be healed overnight or perhaps anytime soon.
So, Danny, of course, some Americans will say this is not the first, not the second time that we're going into a crisis based on race. But this time, the Obama administration has taken a full-on stance right from the beginning, really, saying it's going to now do its own autopsy on the body to understand really what happened there.
That's right. Right now, the FBI is going through the measures to understand what exactly happened. The New York Times recently released a report going through what had happened, the scuffle with the police officer when he saw what he saw reported was Johnson blocking traffic. Mm-hmm. And then they had a bit of a scuffle. The scuffle turned into a bit of an altercation within the police car and then the shooting. Now they said there were 6 shots, 2 of them to the head. So there's a lot of details that still are being looked into.
And there's 2 different narratives now that have been heard. It's the police narrative, which is what you just went through. And there's also his family's narrative, and which has, of course, now expanded to the larger population of Ferguson and actually the United States, saying he had succumbed to police, he had put his hands up, and nevertheless, police had shot him.
That's right, and that's why a lot of people are right now protesting, hands up, don't shoot.
Right.
That their hands are up, that he was an innocent guy. And what was really difficult for the community to understand is why the authorities released the information they did. First saying that, listen, this guy was involved in a robbery in a store, and then showing the footage and releasing this video. So even with that in mind, let the punishment fit the crime. That's what the community can't understand. Mm-hmm. Even if he was involved in this thing with a convenience store, it still doesn't give an officer a right to shoot him. And then we find out later that wasn't even connected. The officer stopping Brown had nothing to do, in fact, with anything related to that robbery.
And we're seeing now on our screens, we'll be seeing soon, there's a live from Missouri now. We're going to see a press conference given now by police. Let's take a listen in quickly, Danny, with me, and we'll catch up on this.
Dollar store and a self-storage business. All were on West Florissant. These are some of the shootings tonight, in addition to the shooting at 8:25 p.m. 1 minute later at 8:26, shots were fired to the north on Canfield. At 8:27, there was a report of a subject down. At 8:28, there was a report of 8 people with guns. Tactical teams were dispatched. At 8:56, hundreds of protesters marched toward the Northland Shopping Center where we stand at this moment, the site of this command post. As the crowd approached the shopping center, multiple Molotov cocktails were thrown at police. At that time, police deployed tear gas in an attempt to disperse the crowd and stop the violent action. At that time, we called in additional support from area police agencies. At 9:15, there was a call for a large crowd gathering at the McDonald's on West Florissant. At 9:20, it was reported that McDonald's was being overrun and employees had locked themselves in the storage room. There were multiple additional reports of Molotov cocktails being thrown. Police were shot at. Makeshift barricades were set up to block police. Bottles and rockets were thrown at police.
This is Ferguson police giving a roundup of what happened earlier today on the second night of curfew. So obviously the curfew is not really sticking in place. He's giving a list of shootings, Molotov cocktails being thrown and so forth. This is not a problem that's just going to disappear.
Absolutely not. People are going to continue to be upset at this. There is an implicit racial bias in a lot of places in the United States. It's no secret. When we look at the numbers, 40% of the 2.3 million inmates in the U.S. are black. People getting pulled over, the numbers are there, they're clear. And this is just another example. People are upset and the cops and the authorities have not handled this well.
And it comes just, a few years after another incident in Florida, not even a year maximum after the incident in Florida and so forth. People that are protesting, it's not only protesters that are black. It is, as you say, a wider population of enough is enough. There is some kind of policy here that needs to be changed.
Yeah, it needs to be looked into. 1 million black people are in jail right now. They say 1 in 3 black males can expect to enter prison at some point in their lives.
Wow.
And that's compared to 1 in 17 whites. So there is this implicit racial bias, and people have to speak up, and they are. They're using this opportunity as a chance to really make their voices heard. I can understand their anger.
The question is, of course, when the violence will become too violent to actually remember this message that you're telling us right now. And that's perhaps why the FBI is involved, because they do want to show that there is some kind of a federal investigation into this, and it's not going to just be, man versus man on the street.
That's right. I mean, we could see that the state of Missouri has done a very poor job of handling this, making mistake after mistake. So the feds getting involved, showing that they are doing something, they are trying to make justice, be served. With that in mind, again, you could still see people are upset. Obviously, taking it too far, the use of Molotov cocktails, looting has been a problem, which does undermine some of the important messages. But people in the town of Ferguson are trying to come together and prevent these things from happening so the real messages can get through.
Gabby?
The protests also target the media bias towards this entire case, and there's been an online campaign using the hashtag #IfTheyGunnedMeDown, in which young African Americans pose two photos of themselves, one as good and clean cut and the other as so-called threatening images of themselves with a hoodie, like Trayvon Martin from the previous infamous case. And they basically ask, if I was gunned down by the police, how would the media would portray me as as a military officer or as a hip-hop head? And that's also a very interesting question that's being on a lot of people's minds lately.
Indeed, the media has been following this closely, and we're definitely going to see, Danny, more people speaking out against this. This is, as we just saw now, a police conference live in Ferguson, Missouri, where police are giving over maybe the last night's attempts at any kind of disorder, and we're seeing it's not something that's calming down at all. Danny, thank you for joining us. Gabby, you're here with some headlines from around the world. What are you starting with?
I'm starting with the wedding of the year, but unfortunately it's the wedding of the year for all the wrong reasons. The Jerusalem Post reports about last night's wedding here in Israel, in Rishon LeZion, an interfaith wedding between Mahmoud Mansour and Morel Malka. He is a Muslim. She is about to convert to Islam. And this union was not given much blessings.
To say the least.
To say the least. Violent demonstrations throughout. They used security during this event. 6 people were detained. A fundamentalist group called Le'ava, which calls for preventing so-called assimilation here in Israel, protested against this entire affair.
Just to reinforce that, protesting assimilation between Jewish women to Arab men.
Yes, they deem it as the biggest threat on Israel's Jewish identity, that Jewish women are so-called tempted to fall in love with Arab men, and they decided to protest. Israeli court approved the demonstration.
On the grounds that
freedom of speech probably surpasses the freedom of privacy. And there also been a counter demonstration of people presenting flowers.
Yeah.
The Israeli
demonstration of love.
Demonstration of love, always important. The Ministry of Health, Yael German, attended the wedding. President Rivlin also condemned the incitement, which involved this entire affair. Said there's a red line that has been crossed, and
people were surprised by his intervention, saying that he himself comes from the very right and so forth. But this was, of course, obviously a red line.
Yes, and President Rivlin said that regardless of your own personal belief and opinion, you must respect other people's decision. And I think people were taken aback by Rivlin's statement because it seems that no other top Israeli official decided to tackle the issue. And so once you leave that vacuum to open statements, President Rivlin also makes a strong claim.
Indeed, that was. I'm happy that the wedding went through. They had 600 guests.
Yes, a modest wedding by Israeli standards.
600 guests, among other guests that were outside or so forth, counter protests and so forth. I hope they got their checks, and I hope everything is...
Yes, I hope they won't be interrupted on their honeymoon.
Exactly.
That could be awkward.
Yeah, I would suggest them to, go far away.
Yes.
Honeymoon as far away as possible. What else do you have?
The aftermath of Protective Edge. Haaretz reports about an IDF investigation. There have been 5 IDF soldiers killed in 15 cases of friendly fire. Many of these incidents are still under investigation. As I said, 5 soldiers were killed, 23 were injured. There are a couple of interesting incidents which do need to be investigated. One is that soldiers returned vests from combat and a grenade exploded in one of the vests. It's still not clear if the pin was open, if it's just an old grenade. So there's still a lot of investigation to be done. Also, another incident involved an artillery firing towards the wrong direction of the entire operation, also killing and wounded several IDF soldiers. So we're still going to need to see what exactly happened.
These stories come out, of course, as you said, after the operation, not during. We never really speak about friendly fire during the operation.
Yes.
What else do you have?
The Guardian reports about Cliff Richard. We spoke about how media handles its affairs. The South Yorkshire Police complain that the BBC actually breached its own editorial guidelines because they got the word that they're going to search Cliff Richard's house. This involves an ongoing investigation regarding sexual abuse that probably allegedly happened in 1985. Apparently, a press chopper was already hovering over Cliff Richard's penthouse, and the South Yorkshire police claimed that the BBC got the lead and did not respect the full authority of the law to properly investigate and use this heads up to channel its live streaming of Cliff Richard's house, who wasn't in at the time. He was in Portugal.
There you go. So no juicy gossip from there.
But I'm sure we'll hear some juicy gossip about Cliff Richard.
Yeah, it's not a story that's going away.
Yeah, speaking of lawsuits, the New York Post reports that the Seinfeld diner, Tom's Diner, is being sued for not being handicap friendly.
They're not anything friendly.
Yes.
It's not only
no lunch for you.
Friendly, exactly.
They're not friendly. The famous diner on Broadway on the corner of 112th Street has been under
discrimination.
Discrimination. They're saying there's a lot of violations regarding the affirmative actions for the disabled, and one resident that is handicapped said that I can't get inside. There's no bars. And the owner actually said, the manager said, that we don't have access to handicapped people. We have tables outside, and maybe it will be a problem during the summertime, but we won't fix it yet. Maybe someday.
Yeah, they have too many tourists coming. They don't need anything for that. Gary Tartakovsky, thank you for joining us. Danny Seibel, thank you for joining us. We'll be back after these headlines with more I-24 News Morning Edition. Welcome back to I-24 News Morning Edition. We're on to another subject here in Israel. Real estate prices are still rocket high in Israel's main cities, and there are some that are thinking of alternative towns and cities, or simply establishing new villages in Israel's Negev Desert in the south or in the Galilee in the north. The Elim Association was founded in 2002 with the goal of strengthening these existing communities in these areas and social involvement, and also establishing student and entrepreneur villages. This young social entrepreneurship fosters a connection between people and land, as well as between the individual and greater society. To hear more about it, we're joined now in studio by Partnership Director at the Elim Movement, Effie Rubin. Good morning, Effie. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So obviously, I took it to the my own perspective, which is, of course, the rocket high prices in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem, in parts of Haifa as well, and therefore there's also that kind of economic connection to live in places that are not as developed, perhaps.
True. Currently, we are building a new student village in Sderot, and we're doing it out of recycled shipping containers, which are between 30 and 40% less expensive to build and 80% less in time. So yes, in that aspect, we are able to build much cheaper and to allow cheaper prices for people to live in.
But it's not only about the prices, right? The Elim Association also has an ideology and so forth.
Definitely.
And there's the people that are running it, you included. Your motive for doing this is completely ideological and not maybe economical.
True. We are trying to build Israel's periphery, living Ben-Gurion's dream of transforming Israel's periphery into a place to live in. And we're doing this through establishment of student villages. Our goal is to bring young, educated Israelis to live in these peripheral areas.
But isn't that the job of the government? I mean, you mentioned Ben-Gurion. He was, of course, the father of the state of Israel. His vision was a vision that the government was going to do it. It wasn't a vision of a lone person.
Yet 60 years later, it's still unsettled. But
Why is that, by the way, in your opinion?
There are many challenges. You mentioned housing. There's hardly any houses in these areas. Jobs is a problem as well. Opportunity in general. But we're seeing a shift where we are able to bring more and more young Israelis who have high Zionist motivation, who want to do good to these areas, and they're moving, and they're having a better life quality in these areas.
You mentioned jobs, which is, of course, something that will come to mind when people even, decide where to live in and build a house, build a family, and so forth. What kind of jobs are available, and is that something that the Ayelim Association tries to connect between the people that are moving to these areas and finding them employment?
We are focused more on the students, so it's less about jobs, but definitely you're seeing a shift in Israel towards the south. The army is relocating to the south, opening many opportunities in these areas. Beersheba is becoming a big city with many opportunities. So yes, there are more and more jobs opportunities in these areas as well. And the more young people comes, that also creates a market.
Right. How long do these people stay? So we have how many students today? Does
in Ayelim?
Yeah.
We have about 1,000 students and pre-army volunteers, and we're growing. Now we're building this village in Sderot. It's going to be home for 300 more students.
And how long do these people stay in the south?
For 3 years during their bachelor's. 3 years.
And will they then opt to stay longer? Say, this is become our home, and now we want to actually live here? And
we are building student villages, hoping that after having a great experience, after 3 years, they will decide to stay permanently and make their homes there. That's our final goal. Many of our students stay.
And did you start out off as a student in these villages?
Yes.
Where were you? Tell me your story.
I started in Ashalim. Back then, today we have 12 student villages. Ashalim was our first village. And we were in the south, in the Negev. And we were a few young Israelis with a great dream. And 12 years after that, we have 12 student villages, 10 alumni villages, and we are growing, and our message is getting out.
How cheap is it for a student to live in a Ayelim village versus paying rent to a landlord and having to deal with the bureaucracy of city municipalities and so forth?
We believe in volunteering. So each student in our organization volunteers 500 hours annually. So we need to provide them with cheap housing and with their tuition so they could have the time for that. So they don't pay much. It's like $150 per month per student.
Wow.
Which allows you to volunteer and do good in these areas. Now we're moving to
food and so forth and logistics.
Just as any other students, you buy your food, you live in an apartment, you can cook, you buy.
And would you say that the Ayelim Association, in order to grow, and we mentioned the lack of government involvement, needs what now? What's the next step for Ayelim to grow? Does it need more money? Does it need maybe recognition from the government? Has there been recognition?
The government has been our partner and increasingly is our partner. At the moment, we started building more villages for our alumni, but not only, for young Israelis who want to move to these areas after they're students. And our greater mission here, our greater goal, is to demonstrate to the government and to other agencies, to the market basically, that many Israelis would move to these areas if we allow them by creating jobs, you mentioned, and creating housing for them to move to. So we're in a way, we're the catalyst for the market to come after us.
And obviously, there is an ideological aspect. You mentioned Zionism and Ben Gurion, but it's also, and as I mentioned, my big perspective on this was an economical, financial aspect. Are there other places around the world that you've maybe seen as a prototype for the Ayelim Association? Places, that students and young people such as yourself decide we're going to take the initiative and build?
We're more and more hear from other countries who want to copy our model.
Really?
We came with this model ourselves. We were trying to think of a method that would enable young Israelis to move to these areas. And the idea of working with students, we believe at this stage of life, you can still make changes. So more and more we hear from other countries of copying this model we came up with.
You mentioned Sderot. Of course, the Sderot is in the news for many other reasons, unfortunately. And that is my question. You're building on these frontiers of Israel's borders. Sderot is just one of them, but a lot of the Negev was in the eye of rocket fire. Operation Protective Edge is still not over. Are these student villages reinforced, and can you ensure security?
I mentioned we're building out of shipping containers, but
right. That doesn't sound so secure
it's
to me.
not that secure, but each 2 units share a bomb shelter. But Sderot, we mentioned Israel's periphery, which is suffering from negative net migration. So Sderot, on top of that, is also dealing with 13, 14 years of being under fire. So we're trying to help the society there by bringing young Israelis to live there.
And where do you see yourself in the next 5 years?
As a movement?
As a movement.
More and more dealing with the next stage, after students, with alumni villages, and bringing other Israelis to these areas. And families,
You start
of
with
course.
families. That's have people get married within these villages and make.
You see, many of our students have found love within the
there you
student
go.
village.
See, I knew it.
It happens.
Thank you very much, Effie, for
My
joining
pleasure.
us. Stay with us. We're now joined in studio by the Culture Magazine editor Avri Rosenzweig. Good morning, Avri. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
What are you starting with?
Well, we're starting with A Most Wanted Man, which is a film that was released recently. It's notably one of the last films Philip Seymour Hoffman filmed before he died tragically this year from an overdose. It was very, very sad because he was truly one of the greatest actors in his generation.
Was it finished before he had died? Or
It was. Okay. No, it was finished and it was showing at festivals. This is a movie, an espionage movie based on a John le Carré novel. It was directed by Anton Corbijn, who previously made Control, which got very, very good reviews, and The American. He's sort of a very art house director, and we'll get to that later. But it is the story of Gunther Buchmann. He's a German intelligence officer in Hamburg. And this is it's one of Le Carré's later novels. It deals with a post-9/11 world, which is not so black and white. It's a lot of grays, and the movie sort of deals with looking for Islamic, operatives, and it has a very sort of let's say moral gray areas it deals with.
Well, after 9/11, everything seems to be gray areas. But Philip, how's his acting there?
Well, that's the thing. Everybody's talking about Philip Seymour Hoffman's acting in this movie. Peter Travers from the Rolling Stones calls it a masterclass in acting. Kenneth Turan of the LA Times says it's one of the most demanding roles in a lifetime of demanding roles. So they're all praising his acting, but you get a feeling
that we see a lot of times after, unfortunately, actors pass away, and we see their last work, Heath Ledger, so forth. And
well, first of all,
there's Robin Williams movie coming out.
Yeah, but he has always gotten good reviews. It's not like, at least not like now they're jumping on the bandwagon.
Right.
But you get a feeling that they're really praising it because it's his last film. And then we get to the problematic part, which is sort of the audience meeting this film.
Okay.
Because I think that, it's a movie that wouldn't have gotten so much attention if it wasn't one of Philip Seymour Hoffman's last films. It's a very
Most likely, yeah.
It's a very cold, arty film, and everyone is giving it attention because it's Philip Seymour Hoffman's last film, and a lot of people in the audience are sort of disappointed because it's a difficult film.
Right. It's not made for the mass audience.
It's not really made for a mass audience. It only made $13 million worldwide since its release a month ago, and so, it's problematic. But it's Philip Seymour Hoffman, and it's one of his last performances. So.
And the reviews are basically on his acting and less on the film?
No, they're saying the film is really, really good, but I think they're kind of not, there's a telling review by Todd McCarthy from The Hollywood Reporter. He says, this admirably textured thriller will prove absorbing to attentive audiences who don't need everything spelled out to them, where casual and mainstream viewers will likely tune out in mild befuddlement. Oh. He's sort of saying this movie is a little boring.
From alternative movie to alternative graphic novel.
Yeah, so we have Kill My Mother by Jules Feiffer.
Yeah, just from the headline, it's not for mass audiences either.
Yeah, well, Jules Pfeiffer is a very, very interesting cartoonist. He's a very important one. He's already 85 years old, and now he's making his first sort of genre graphic novel. This is a film, like a noir. It's not a film. Right. It's a comics noir graphic novel. It tells of a young widow who comes to work for a private eye in hopes of finding the man who killed her husband. But Jules Pfeiffer has been in the industry for 70-something years.
He's 85 years old.
He's 85
Wow.
years old. You know, his cartoons appeared in the New Yorker, Esquire,
Right.
the Los Angeles Times. He had his own sort of the first cartoon on the editorial page of the New York Times called Pfeiffer, ran for many, many years. And he also drew one of the earliest graphic novels, so-called graphic novels that they say he wrote in 1979. So he really has a lot of cred in the industry.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. He says that he came to this project sort of fearful because he has a very, very loose, sketchy line. And he says, I felt like I'm not the right artist to draw this story that I wanted to draw. Like all of his life, he says he loved film noir. He loved Howard Hawks, Billy Wilder, John Huston, and he's dedicated this book to them, as well as Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett, who are sort of the luminaries of the detective novel. And he says, I didn't feel like I could pull off the story I wanted to make, and sort of he tried really changing his style at 85.
This is crazy. Well, it's never too late. It's never too late.
It's never too late, and this book is not out yet. It's out at the end of the month, but early reviews are glowing.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying, you know, he's not trying to reinvent the genre. He's trying to be respectful to it, and from what we saw, and I think we saw it on the screen,
Right.
it looks like a beautiful book.
We'll wait for that very much so. 85 years old. At 85 years old, I'm congratulating him already without even having to see it. Quickly, an Israeli hip-hop opera.
Yeah,
I've been following this story.
Yeah, it was a very interesting story. There was supposed to be an Edinburgh Fringe Festival. There were very, very sort of violent demonstrations. Not violent, but like...
vocal.
Mm-hmm. I thought the thing that struck me, I think anyone should demonstrate whatever they want, but they disrupted other shows in the venue that it was, which seems to me like foul play,
Right.
you know?
They were, just to make it clear, they were protesting it because
it's in Israeli and a few $100s that Israel gave to fly them there. It's really a ridiculous story. And so they weren't able to do it at Edinburgh in the end, sadly. Because of the demonstrations, nobody would sort of vouch for it. And they did one demonstration themselves where they did the play muted, you know, but the Jewish community in Britain sort of pulled together, and in the course of these 2 weeks, they're going to have 5 shows in Glasgow, London, Leeds, and sort of Jewish centers and stuff like that. So British audiences will get to see this.
And the Israeli hip hop actors can visit London and.
Yeah.
Edinburgh is overrated anyway.
Oh, come on.
I'm kidding. Avi Rosenthal, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Of course, we're going to end our broadcast here. Next up are the headlines. We'll be here tomorrow with more I-24 News Morning Edition. I'm Yael Wisner-Levy. I'll be back tomorrow. See you soon.